breaking. Okay. While we have these things breaking out now across the United States, the violence of the environmental crises is much more difficult to see, much more invisible. The videos of it are really hard to digest when one can come across visible evidence at all. So I really want to, without minimizing what's going on across the United States, want to connect it to these other forms of violence against non-human species, against ecosystems. I don't think it's unfair to say that we, as a species, humanity has our knee on the neck of Mother Nature, and we don't seem to care enough, and we don't seem to be lifting it off quickly enough. I just want to connect quickly these events in the United States with two other things. It's hard to really understand which events become tipping points. It's hard to understand which events lead to emergent results that are unpredicted from the beginning, something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think of two facts from China. The first is that the coronavirus pandemic and the shutdown in China has led China to abandon its growth goals. It had hoped to grow the economy by 6%. It has given up that goal because of the consequences, social, economic, political, of the pandemic. Giving up that goal is actually a huge boon environmentally, potentially at least. And again, it's something that we could hardly have expected, that one of the world's greatest economies would give up its growth goals. Those growth goals, not just in China, but throughout the world, the obsession with enlarging GDP, gross national product, every year, GNP, is part of the problem. So the fact that this disease and its spread has led the world's second largest economy to give up growth goals is quite stunning. At the same time, I read, I think yesterday, that air pollution in China is already back up to pre-pandemic levels. In other words, this Sabbath, this Shabbat, this break, this rest in pollution that was caused by this pandemic and the shutdown had such incredible visible results visible by satellite, where pollution had decreased by 20, 30, 50%, depending on which particular pollutant we're talking about. And already it is back up to the levels that it was at before the pandemic. Again, quite stunning, quite sobering. So again, this moment of reflection, this pandemic, which was the initial impetus for this conversation, this discussion, is one tipping point. The racial matters that are erupting on the surface is another tipping point. And I want to think really collectively about what happens when we come out of this pandemic shutdown, as we are doing now. What kind of world do we want to step into? We can't go back to normal. Normal was crazy. It was not normal. So what comes next? And the Green Sabbath Project, I started it in order to harness the power of the Sabbath, the Shabbat, a day of rest once a week, an idea and practice that's indigenous to the great monotheisms, the three monotheistic religions, the main monotheistic religions of the world. And it seemed to me, and I'm hardly alone in thinking this, that it offers a holistic and productive, potentially very fruitful solution. A universal day of rest, a weekly eco-Sabbath, this ancient spiritual technology that I seek to repurpose for collective ecological survival suggests itself as one powerful tool among the arsenal of tools that we must be using. Sabbath or Shabbat, properly practiced, offers a weekly interruption of the suicidal econometric fantasy of infinite growth. It offers a weekly divestment from fossil fuels. It offers a weekly investment in local community, a weekly bit of rewilding, a respite for both humans and other than humans, and a ritualized forum for meditating on how we want to live. As Greta Thunberg reminds us, we already know what the solutions are for our environmental crises. Green Sabbaths would provide a recurring greenhouse for incubating the required collective consciousness and willpower, the ultimate renewable energies, to make the solutions reality. Green Sabbaths would constitute both a model and a foretaste of the ecologically sane world to come. At least that is my hope. How do we make this happen? How do we get there? What strategies do we use? What are the challenges ahead of us in doing that? That's why we invited this panel of amazing people, and we will now turn to them. Let me just quickly remind you all or enlighten you all about the format of the event. We will go around through the panelists and hear from them each for a few short minutes each. We will then open it up to discussion between the panelists. And then lastly, we will tackle some of the many questions that I know the audience has, some of which we've already received. I want to just thank Shana Goodman, who maybe she can wave and say hello. She is the project coordinator for the Green Sabbath Project, and she is the woman behind the scenes making all of this possible, managing the event. So Shana, thank you ever so much.
I'm muting briefly. Hi, everyone.
Great, thank you, Shana. One last word before we turn to our first panelist. I had reached out to many people who I thought would be suitable, inspiring, thought-provoking leaders to join us tonight, including many people of color, many women. Unfortunately, not everyone could join us, so the makeup of the panel that we have tonight is not reflective of any particular approach or decision making on our part. It really reflects the factors, the reality factor of who could make it and who could not. So Ellen Bernstein has volunteered to start us off, Rabbi Ellen Bernstein, and let me just introduce her to you very quickly. Rabbi Bernstein founded Shomrei Adama, Keepers of the Earth, the first national Jewish environmental organization in 1988. I had the pleasure and honor of working with her way back then. Since then, she has been writing and teaching about Judaism and ecology really across the country, if not across the world. Her ecologically oriented Passover Haggadah, which is called The Promise of the Land, was just published this spring in time for Passover. And Ellen, really thank you so much for being here. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jonathan and Shana, for everything you've done to get us going here. The Sabbath has always seemed to me like a deeply green institution, whether we name it that or not. In the Bible, it is immediately established as a testament to the creation, to all of nature, and that's how I've always celebrated it. In the mind of the Bible, the Sabbath is an integral and necessary part of the rhythm of life, 6 parts work and 1 part rest. What would the world look like if everybody was able to take a day off for healing and family time, refreshment, self-care, play, the enjoyment of creation, and to get in touch with the holiness of just breathing? I think it would look drastically different and healthier and saner than the world we live in today. Keeping the Sabbath in the Bible was a requirement, one of the 10 commandments, on a par with not killing, which makes me wonder also if Sabbath keeping could also temper our rage. I want to spend my couple of minutes focused on how to frame the whole idea of a green Sabbath. First, the issue of language. There's been some concern that the word Sabbath could alienate secular audiences, and that maybe we should just call this a universal day of rest. I believe that the word Sabbath is deeply resonant, not just for Jews and Christians, but for many people, and is commonly recognized and understood. Secular academics, after all, have no problem with the word sabbatical. In fact, sabbatical points to the most beloved institution in the academy. The sabbatical is simply an extension of the idea of the Sabbath. We need for the Sabbath to become as universally cherished as the sabbatical. The word Sabbath has already found its way into the poetic and ecological lexicon through the work of powerful writers like Wendell Berry. All this depth and memory would be lost if we abandon the word Sabbath. I'm interested in how we reach audiences beyond those who already celebrate the Sabbath. In these couple of minutes, my comments are necessarily loose and vague. To me, one of the primary challenges is a public relations challenge and an image challenge. How do we get people excited about this? I believe that the arts offer the most universal and potent way to connect with people. Art and music touch emotions, which is what we must do in order to capture people's imagination. I envision a large campaign engaging artists, musicians, composers, and dancers to generate works of art that develop the meaning and the message of the Sabbath in order to pique people's curiosity about what Sabbath honoring might mean for them. I imagine engaging with well-known and beloved nature and spirituality writers who may want to explore the place where nature and culture meet in a practice of the Sabbath, and hopefully to write about the idea of the Green Sabbath. We need op-eds and stories in the New York Times and the Atlantic and everywhere else for that matter. I imagine partnering with groups who are already doing related work on the intersection of nature, culture, and spirituality, retreat centers like the Omega Institute, the Chautauqua Institution, and Kripalu, colleges like the Naropa Institute, and communities like Emergence Magazine and the radio program On Being. I also want to offer a couple of organizational models to also help launch a conversation. These both involve food, since in the Jewish world, we all know that food is a primary inducement in bringing people together. The organization One Table, a Shabbat or Sabbath dinner program for millennials in the Jewish community, promotes the Sabbath as, quote, the most ancient wellness ritual, end quote, by providing funds for people in their 20s and 30s to host non-prescriptive Friday night dinners in their homes for their peers. The organization trains people how to host, provides educational materials and support for engaging people in a kind of universal practice of the Sabbath, and serves as a matchmaking agent to connect individuals to appropriate dinners in their locale. The program has been running for about 5 years, has served over 100,000 people, and is highly successful. While the program is focused on Friday night dinners only, it serves as an invitation to make the Sabbath a regular part of the lives of participants. Half of the guests credit One Table with their newfound interest in making the Sabbath a regular part of their lives. Another model on a similar theme is the Sikh practice of langar, where volunteers come together to prepare large vegetarian meals for potentially thousands of people. Everyone eats together, sitting on the floor, heads covered and feet bare, emphasizing that everyone is equal and part of one world community, one earth community. I imagine something like this could serve as a centerpiece for a Green Sabbath. Let me close by saying that while I think there are numerous public relations and organizational challenges to developing a universal Green Sabbath, I think these challenges are challenges worth pursuing, and I'd love to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, Rabbi Ellen. Delightful. I hope all of the panelists will send their notes to us afterwards. I'll remind you, but Ellen, thank you. Great way to start us off. Very thoughtful and thought-provoking. Shantha, are you willing to step up now?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Let me
So,
introduce you quickly,
okay.
if that's okay. Shantha Reddy Alonso, who you see right before us now, has served as Executive Director of Creation Justice Ministries since 2015. Creation Justice Ministries is an ecumenical organization with a mission to educate, equip, and mobilize Christians to protect, restore, and more rightly share God's creation. Based on the priorities of its members with special concern for the most vulnerable, Creation Justice Ministries fosters eco-justice transformations in people of faith. Shantha's ministry has been featured in The Hill, Sojourners, NPR, Religion News Service, U.S. Catholic, and Grist. Shantha, welcome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you very much for the invitation. This is such a timely and important topic to talk about Sabbath. So my observation is that the principles of Sabbath are not being respected or practiced on any scale that we need to see, and that the pandemic has indeed given us a window into what it might look like for God's creation and our communities if Sabbath were more broadly adopted. And some of those have already been articulated, but I also want to make sure that I use my time to contribute some thoughts on how the pandemic has provided a window into the profound race and class inequities in US society. And while for some, the pandemic has been a pleasant time for baking bread and deepening family relationships, or it's become an introspective retreat, for others, it's been extremely difficult. And I'm particularly thinking about the people who have been deemed essential workers, who did not get this accidental opportunity for Sabbath, and who kept all, the privilege of sheltering in place for others, but did not get to experience it themselves. And so when I think about the possibility of moving into Sabbath practices and being intentional about how that is done, I would challenge us to think about how we clearly articulate and protect the opportunity for equity and racial justice in honoring the Sabbath. And we would want a Sabbath that is not only good for earth, but also affirming the humanity of all, including that Black Lives Matter. And so what are some cultural shifts that I would like to see articulated in any moving forward with increase in practice of Sabbath? I think a lot of people are experiencing joy in this time of the pandemic in seeing that the family unity has been respected more. And so I would like to see more reverence for family unity being an explicitly articulated part of increasing Sabbath. And that has to do with challenging, in the US, the prison industrial complex, which holds 1 in 37 people and keeps them from their families. This is especially important for Black communities that, African Americans are incarcerated at 5 times the amount of whites. Think about what that does to families. Think about the ability of families to participate in Sabbath without the presence of their loved ones. This is true as well when we think about the immigrant detention centers, the separation of families at the border. Would a Sabbath mindset, would the practice of Sabbath totally shift the way people are sensitized to the deprivation of family unity? That's something that I'd like to look at closely. I also think that the modern economy, as has been well articulated already, it requires many families to hold on multiple jobs. And so how do we, along with Sabbath practices, think about wages that enable families to engage in Sabbath practices so that everyone can enjoy this, not just people who want to or have the privilege and can. And then the core purpose of this webinar is to really focus on the Green Sabbath, the opportunity for the earth. And the Sabbath is an opportunity to nurture our relationship with God's creation. And so I hope it will sensitize us to conservation goals. And I think in particular, as we articulate Sabbath practices for ourselves for the benefit of earth, we also should think about Sabbath as a geographical concept and Sabbath for specific places, special places. We think about how sacred sites are being torn up and disrespected in our extractive economy, how Bears Ears National Monument is being dismantled for extractive purposes, how there's considering uranium mining in the Grand Canyon, which is the site of the creation story of many indigenous communities. Let's think about Sabbath places in addition to Sabbath times. So those are a few of my considerations about equity issues. There is a really exciting campaign that Creation Justice Ministries is engaged in right now that I think fits very well with the idea of Green Sabbath, and it's called 30 by 30. The goal is to protect 30% of the natural world by the year 2030, and to put it under strong conservation protections, both terrestrial and marine creation. And this is the amount that scientists are saying is the bare minimum we need to do to have a resilient Earth. So as we think about Sabbath places, and we prioritize in particular protecting sacred sites, protecting the Earth with some of these Sabbath concepts and Sabbath places is something that's interesting to me and I'd like to dive into further. Thank you.
Shantha, thank you so much. Wonderful. I appreciate your adding those dimensions for us. Really grateful. Thank you. Let us turn now to Benjie Backer. Benji, you ready? Let me just say a few words about you. And Ellen, Shantha, everyone who's spoken, don't disappear, please. We hope to hear more from you as we open up to open conversation. Benji is a president and founder of the American Conservation Coalition and a senior at the University of Washington. So yes, he is definitely among our younger participants. Really very, very glad to have you with us. He serves on the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum's Leadership Council. He has been awarded the GRIST 50, the Forbes 30 Under 30, the Red Alert 30 Under 30, and Green Biz 30 Under 30. And Benji grew up in Wisconsin. Benji, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. And it is just an honor to be here. I think I'm usually one of the youngest people in a lot of these discussions, but I'm oftentimes also one of the only conservatives that's involved in conversations like these. And it's just, I'm really honored to be invited, and to be included shows the inclusion for not just minority communities and low-income communities, but also the diversity of political opinion, which I think is really important if we want to get something done on environmental issues. The thing that really speaks to me most about the importance of coming together on this, before I get into why I'm so excited about the work that Jonathan's doing on this issue, is I sat in front of Congress as to my knowledge, one of the first Republicans to ever testify in front of Congress on behalf of fixing climate change. And I was sitting at the same desk right next to Greta Thunberg. And it was incredible how much common ground we had. And really what it comes down to is that this generation, my generation, the younger generations, it's our future that is being affected by every decision being made right now. And the crisis that we have with climate change, it doesn't care about political party, doesn't care about political affiliation, it doesn't care about gender or race or income. It affects everyone, and it affects people disproportionately, but it affects everyone. And so everyone has a stake at the conversation. And that's why I founded, the first ever conservative advocacy organization on fighting climate change and other environmental issues. As somebody who's been going through COVID as a college senior, I actually graduated on Sunday. And as somebody who has really struggled, emotionally with what's going on over the past week, living in Seattle and having the protests and the riots here, and having the conversation finally be heard amongst my generation, and for me, waking me up to the realities that maybe I didn't understand before. It's been emotionally really tolling. And I think it has been for pretty much everyone who cares about other people. And so I, as an environmentalist and as somebody who is in a younger generation that is often so distracted by our technology or our phones or whatever, I've realized that the best way to best understand life and to best understand the environment and why we're here and how to care about other people is to take a break. It's to take a mental break from everything that's going on. To get somewhat personal, I had a close to mental breakdown during the middle of COVID, and I decided that I needed to go to the mountains where I find the most happiness, to completely decompress, alone, no phone, no coverage, no computer. And that is where, like, I will point back to that week as one of the most enjoyable weeks of my life, but it wasn't because I was in the mountains, really. It was because I actually took a break from what was going on outside, and I actually paid attention to myself. I actually paid attention to the environment. I actually paid attention to the things that I should pay attention to, which is my own well-being, the people around me, thinking about others and how I could be more caring and more compassionate. We don't do that enough. We've lost our way in regard to actually being mindful and present and in the moment and actually thinking about one another on a deeper level than, oh, I'm just going to text this person. And so I'm really excited about, the Green Sabbath Project from the environmental standpoint, but I'm also really excited about it from the mental health standpoint. I think my generation is struggling so much with mental health. I mean, I don't really know anybody that doesn't go to therapy or doesn't have anxiety or doesn't have depression. And that wasn't always that way. I mean, obviously mental health the ability to talk about it has exposed and allowed us to be more open about it. But I mean, everyone is struggling with this. And that's not just because we're more open about it in 2020. It's largely because we have just completely allowed the younger generations to get into these habits and not really realize what's going on and feel like they've lost so much time. And so it's so stressful as a young person to see that. But if we could have a day in each week where we meet people where they're at, because some people aren't going to be able to take as much of a break as others. But if we meet people where they're at and we allow them to decompress and take a step back and reflect on their week and reflect on their life and be with their friends and family, I think that would be one of the greatest things to happen to our society and help move us in a direction that no policy or cultural change could. It's just something that we have to do. And so I am just a huge advocate of that. And I guess I would say that by also, wanting to express that we, like I said earlier, have to meet people where they're at. There are going to be some people that need to work every day, or there's going to be some people who, want to go out on a hike or something on that day. And that means they have to get there. And there are going to be different ways that people take a break and different ways that people do take that step back. And I think we have to meet people with where they're at economically, where they're at geographically, and we have to understand that everyone's going to do that in a different way. And I actually think that that's been part of the fault of the environmental community that I feel like I'm a part of, is that we oftentimes try to put demands on other people, and a lot of times those people can't adhere to those demands because of the situation that they're in. And so I think that we have to allow people to do what they do best, which is take care of themselves, but push them in the right direction through being able to give them an opportunity to reflect and think about their life. So I'm just really excited to see where this goes and be an ally in this effort. And also, help spread it to a new audience. I'm just so thankful that, we're starting to have these conversations because it's long overdue. Mental health is long overdue. Tackling mental health is long overdue. Tackling environmental challenges is long overdue. And we cannot keep pushing both of those things to the sidelines. Thanks, guys.
Benji, thank you. Wonderful. Congratulations on graduating this coming week. Awesome. I know that you'll keep doing many great things. So thanks for, again, adding extra dimensions to the conversation.
Thanks, Jonathan.
We turn now to Archdeacon John Chryssavgis. John, hopefully you're with us. John is Archdeacon in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. He's an author of many works, a theologian who serves as advisor to the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I on environmental issues. He received a doctorate in patristics from Oxford University, while also spending several months, not at the same time, but another achievement, spending several months in silent retreat on Mount Athos. John, please, we're so glad you could be here and looking forward to hearing from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure and honor actually to be in this group and in part of this conversation. I am having a lot of trouble with my internet here in Maine, so if it's very problematic, let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to myself. I usually do that. My kids tell me anyway, so. They're all connected. There's no way they're not connected. Whether we're talking about climate change and talking about the urgency of a generation, talking about the fragility of our planet, or whether we're talking about COVID-19 and talking about the urgency of the present period and the loss of life and the vulnerability of people all over the world and of our institutions, of our healthcare system, for instance, or whether we're talking about racism with the urgency of this moment, the impact of George Floyd's death. I think the memorial service is going on right now. We call these predicaments crises, and crisis is literally, the Greek word means judgment, because we will be judged, we are being judged on the way that we respond to a particular predicament. And these predicaments are literally in our face. In the final analysis, we're hopefully not searching for ways of settling back into our complacent lifestyles. We can't possibly return to the ways that led us in the first place to the predicaments that we're facing. Again, whether in terms of climate, in terms of the pandemic, or in terms of racism. The intention is not just to act differently. Too often we think that solving the ecological crisis is a matter simply of doing things differently, maybe more effectively, maybe more sustainably, and so forth. But doing, just changing direction. But the logic that led to this crisis can't possibly be the same logic that generates a solution to the predicament we're facing. We need something more substantial, something more radical as a change of attitude. The issue is not just securing a more moderate, more politically acceptable, palatable consumerism. It's not just discovering a more mitigated or more restrained form of development. We need something more radical, even revolutionary. Perhaps we need not just development, not just evolution, but revolution. And paradoxically, ecological correction might just begin with environmental inaction, awareness. It's a matter of contemplating things, of being silent, of shutting up, of stopping our activity, of seeing things differently. I think that's what Sabbath is. But first, we must stop what we're doing. So whether we're talking about taking time out, or talking like Benjamin did, of taking a break, we're actually looking ultimately for more permanent solutions based on ethical values, based on spiritual choices. So the whole notion of Sabbath means a great deal to me. In terms of practical suggestions, the only thing that I would, by nature, push towards, encourage towards, is because I'm less concerned about terminology. I'm more concerned about partnering with other groups, partnering with ecumenical groups in particular that already are doing or trying to do similar work, whether it's the work of Pope Francis, whether it's the work of my own Patriarch Bartholomew, the work of the World Council of Churches, the work of the National Council here in the States or churches together. Whether we're talking about the day of prayer for the environment, as the Pope and the Patriarch do, whether we're talking about time for creation or season for creation, my hope is that we can find a way that this notion of Sabbath as rest, as taking a break, as reflection, as self-assessment, can somehow fit into or with what other groups are doing throughout the world. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you very, very much. Very good practical suggestion. I won't bother to respond now. I'll save it to.
Jonathan.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Sorry.
I am now unmuted. Sorry. Thank you, John, so much for your contribution, for sharing your thoughts with us. Really, really grateful to you. And I won't respond to any of what you or the other speakers said just yet. We'll wait until we've gone around. Mirele, are you interested in speaking up now, or do you want to hold your peace as you said you wanted to do? Well, I think she told me she was going to skip her 5 minutes, so I will introduce her in any case. Dr. Mirele B. Goldsmith is an environmental psychologist, educator, and activist. She is an expert in how to change human behavior to solve environmental problems and build a sustainable future. Mirele co-founded Jewish Earth Alliance, a grassroots coalition raising a moral voice on climate change to the US Congress. And of course, there's much more to say, but Mirele wanted to keep it short. Mirele, do you want to say something now? You want to skip your turn? Okay, great. Mirele, great to have you here in any case. Reverend Fletcher Harper of Green Faith, an Episcopal priest, was also going to be with us. He could not make it, really because of the...
Jonathan, I'm here.
Oh, great. See that? Miracles do happen. Now I will explain who you are. Reverend Fletcher Harper is an Episcopal priest. He has served as executive director at Green Faith since 2002. He has led multi-faith organizing for the 2014 and 2017 People's Climate Marches, played a lead role in the faith-based fossil fuel divestment movement, and has won awards for his spiritual writing. We're delighted to have you here. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, and great to see lots of colleagues and friends, to see Bill and Shantha and Nigel and John and Mirele and many others. And thank you for the invitation. And as Shantha did, and as many have, I want to acknowledge Brother Floyd's passing and the pain, the wrenching pain and injustice that is being revealed at this moment. And to say that from our perspective, there is no justice or future for the climate without Black lives mattering a hell of a lot more than they do now. And so I want to come to this topic with some of the intensity and discomfort that I think many of us are feeling at this particular moment. So as Green Faith looks at the climate context that we're in, we see a growing level of fear and frustration and anger about the damage that climate change is doing to our communities in the world. We see how desperately out of balance things are, how the most vulnerable are especially hurt. Because this emergency is so enormous and the forces against us so powerful, it's not easy to find ways to talk about this, and thus most people avoid it altogether while often being silently concerned. We also know that there is an opportunity now for personal and collective transformation and to build a life connected to each other and to the earth, and that our religious and spiritual practices give us the courage to turn towards these challenges. People of faith have turned towards these challenges before, and we need to do so now. And we need to do so by coming together to build much richer, deeper, stronger communities that are committed to taking on these challenges. So the evaluation, or the sort of reflection for me about this universal Sabbath concept sort of idea sort of fits within that. So I'm going to sort of walk through that typology that I just laid out. The first piece of that is the growing level of fear and concern and frustration and anger about our current situation. So to me, one of the questions about the purpose of a universal time off is it time simply to check out, which is absolutely necessary at certain times, but can it be at least an equal part a time to face more directly these latent concerns that are more and more widely shared? If a universal Sabbath doesn't pay significant attention in that direction, then I would have real concerns about it. To the degree that it can be an invitation into a much deeper, more powerful engagement, then it's got potential as an important idea. The second piece is that it is our faith that gives us the ability and the strength to turn towards these great challenges. And our faith gives us the chance to reflect more deeply, and it motivates us to care for those who are most vulnerable and to work alongside those who are most vulnerable among us. There are very clear unpacking of class and privilege issues that need to be engaged seriously as part of discussion about a Sabbath. As Shantha said really eloquently, there are massive numbers of people, given income inequality where it's at in the world, for whom a day of rest is a survival impossibility. And we need to be very careful right up front about centering voices of the poor and of marginalized communities from around the world if this concept is to be a durable one. The way that the French translate the word sustainability is durable, the English spelling of durable pronounced Frenchly. And I'd like to suggest that this concept needs to have some of that durability attached to it in terms of how we think about it. I think a third piece is that the way that we solve the huge problems that we've got is by finding ways to come together more rather than moving apart more. And to the degree that a Sabbath fosters that coming together, which in traditional cultures it usually has, the more potential that it has. To the degree that a Sabbath is taken as in the individualistic manner of quote unquote developed cultures, then I think it has problems attached to it that are not necessarily going to help solve the problem. I think just a few sort of other pieces of the picture. I think we need to be careful about a simple assumption that one day of rest will automatically cut greenhouse gas emissions or consumption levels. I don't know that there's any research that would back that up. And I think we need to interrogate that assumption quite a bit. What's needed globally at this stage is a true global transformation of how power is shared, how economic and political systems work. And that to me is a sort of the key sort of discrimination point, judgment point around a Sabbath concept is what does it do to contribute to that transformation? And then the final piece that I would say is that with any discussion nowadays about religion in public life, we need to make sure that we do not assume that all religion is a good thing. In regards to the global climate, it is close to unarguable that religion's impact at a very large scale globally, I'm not saying anybody on this call, but conservative religious forces, fundamentalist and extremist religious forces in Brazil, India, the United States, many other countries have had absolutely ruinous impacts on the climate. And so we need to think when we're bringing a religious concept into public space, how do we safeguard against its misappropriation? So I think this is a concept with potential, but with significant questions that need to be engaged seriously as it advances. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Reverend Fletcher. I appreciate you articulating some of those hard truths that I agree we really do need to keep in mind. So thank you. I'm glad you could make it here. Next up, Bill McKibben, who should need no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. He is an author and journalist who has written extensively on the impact of global warming, including some 12 environmentally oriented books since his first, The End of Nature, in 1989. He started the Step It Up campaign for solutions to global climate change in 2007. 1 year later, he started the group 350.org, which he continues to lead. He is the Schumann Distinguished Scholar at Middlebury College. McKibben was awarded the Gandhi Peace Award in 2013. Foreign Policy magazine named him to its inaugural list of the 100 most important global thinkers in 2009. In 2014, he was awarded the Right Livelihood Award for mobilizing growing popular support in the United States and around the world for strong action to counter the threat of global climate change. Bill, an honor to have you here. There you are. Please, it's all yours.
Bill, could you unmute yourself? One second, I'm going to try to unmute you.
There he goes, Bill.
Okay, can you try one more time?
I think that you may have done it.
Okay, great.
You were wise to keep me muted, it must be said. But it's kind of you to let me talk for a minute. And that's all I want to talk for. This has been a remarkable conversation. It's so good to see so many old friends, to see Fletcher and Mirele and Father John and people who are utter pioneers, to think about Ellen Bernstein and Shomrei Adama back in the 1980s brings back many, many memories of the earliest parts of the religious environmental movement. And just, it's a great honor to get to be with this remarkable crew of people and to see happily a lot of new voices coming to the table too. So I'll just say a few things. One is, when I think about the Sabbath, and I'm not much of a theologian, I'm just a Methodist Sunday school teacher, so that you get what you pay for in this world. But the when I think about it, one of the things I think about is breath, ruach, the chance to sit and catch your breath, and that's an idea that should be very much on our minds right now, right this week. I can't breathe is what happens when a police officer kneels on your neck. It's what happens when there's a coal-fired power plant in your neighborhood. It's what happens when police brutality is such a regular fact of life that your cortisol and stress levels are through the roof. It's what happens when the temperature gets to 118 degrees like it was in Delhi the other day, or 129 degrees like it was in cities across the subcontinent last summer. I can't breathe is an idea that we have to take super seriously. Of the 5 million children in Delhi, 2.5 million have irreversible lung damage just from breathing the air, okay? So the chance to take a breath is a great privilege. You can see from that I've been sitting out this quarantine in the woods where I live, which has been easy and a great privilege, and one that I don't take for granted. I think that we all should think about how we're going to figure out how to breathe together and how we're going to make it possible for those who have the hardest time breathing to get that weight off their chests now. I also think that this pandemic response has been one of the most interesting, albeit painful, periods in our history. Certainly in my lifetime, there's been nothing as disruptive or out of the ordinary, and nothing that even approaches it. And I think it shows us two things, one of which is that people are capable of actually dealing with a fair amount of change. It's been stressful for lots of people, and obviously for those who have lost their jobs, for those who have been in the front line work, and for those who have lost their lives or their loved ones have lost their lives, it's been truly horrible. Most people have managed to endure in one way or another. Some people, as others have pointed out, even in certain ways to thrive. So that's an interesting piece of data. The other interesting piece of data, and this builds on something that Reverend Harper was saying just a minute ago, is, we shut down the world for 2 months, and emissions of the things that we worry about the most, like carbon dioxide, fell, but they didn't fall by as much as one might have expected. I mean, I don't know anyone who's been on an airplane for months now, but carbon emissions around the world were down at their peak about 10 or 15%. So that tells us that both individual action and stepping back and things is important, but it also tells us that most of the damage we're doing is hardwired into our systems, and we're going to need to get into the guts of those systems and rip them out and change them in profound and powerful ways. And that's going to take a lot of movement building. So I think as we go forward, that one of the things we should be thinking about as we strategize around a day of rest is what we're using that rest for, and what it is we're resting up to do. Because the answer better be building movements big enough to produce the kind of change we have to have. The change for racial justice, the change for renewable energy, the change for representative democracy that gets the vested interests that keep us from making enough change out of the way. It's not just what we're resting from, it's what we're resting for. It's not just that we're catching our breath, it's that we need to breathe deep so that we can have the strength to go out and do what needs doing. So many thanks to all for their witness and testimony here. It's beautiful, beautiful to hear.
Amen. Bill, thank you. Again, really appreciate the words and thoughts that you're introducing. And my worries that with so many speakers, there would be much redundancy are already assuaged. A testament to the creativity and thoughtfulness of all of the people here. Next up, Nigel Savage. Nigel is the founder of Chazon, the Jewish Lab for Sustainability, which he founded in 2000. He continues to serve as its CEO. Chazon has grown under his leadership to become the world's most prominent Jewish environmental organization, recognized by the Sierra Club as one of 50 leading faith-based environmental organizations. Nigel has twice been named a member of the Forward 50, the annual list of the 50 most influential Jewish people in the United States. Nigel is an avid biker, and Chazon was actually started with a bike ride, an environmental bike ride across the United States. Nigel also thinks that he is the first English Jew to ride across the state of South Dakota on a recumbent bicycle. For that alone, we are grateful to have you here. Nigel, you're up. Thank you. Just make sure you turn your mic on. Shana, do we need to turn his mic on for him?
Muted.
Shana, you have to do it.
Hold on. I have requested to unmute you, so I think you might need to accept it.
Okay. Great. I think that worked. Thank you. I'm just really going to add a couple of things really briefly. I want to, Jonathan and Shana, thank you for doing this and putting it together, and everybody for being on. I first of all just wanted to begin by saying I literally, this has been a crazy roller coaster for all of us, but I just want to note that I just feel really sad and really down and really confused. And we, each of us in different ways, are involved in leading things and doing things. And there is a very weird rhythm of going forwards and backwards. And I find myself today prompted and inspired by things that other people have said, but more so than usually not feeling that I have much clarity or much that I want to say. I want to say not only that every single speaker has said at least something that has provoked me in a good way, but I particularly, Fletcher, want to say that I actually strongly agree with what you said about the fact that religion is not always a force for good in the world. And I want to simply note that pretty much all of my adult life, I have believed that it is and was and should be. And it's just one of many ways at the moment where things that sometimes seem clear to me seem less clear to me. I want to just share a story that I think is very appropriate. About 10 years ago, I got a phone call on a Thursday night from a friend who's a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi, and he was phoning from Biloxi in Mississippi. He was leading a Hillel group of Jewish college students who had gone down for a week to fix roofs in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, I guess it was. And the way that it worked is they flew down on Sunday, they did orientation Monday morning, and then they fixed roofs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, stopped for Shabbat, and flew home on Sunday. And that late afternoon, the Thursday afternoon, a bunch of these college students got together with him and they said, Rabbi, we're not religious, like we're Jewish. We were happy to come on this trip, but we came here to fix roofs and we feel like we're being productive and we don't want to stop. We want to mend roofs on Saturday and not celebrate Shabbat. And this rabbi phoned me and he said, I'm an Orthodox rabbi. I've kept Shabbat all of my life, and I believe in that. And at the same time, I'm leading this project, and I sort of respect the students, and I'm a bit confused and I don't know what to say. What do you think I should say to them? And I thought for a minute, and I said, look, you should say to them, look, it's the 21st century, and nobody here can make you do or not do anything that you want. And so if at the end of the day, on balance, you want to go out and mend roofs, then you should go and mend roofs. He said, but the reason that as a group of mostly white, mostly somewhat privileged Jewish college students, you've chosen to come down here and to fix the roofs of people who overwhelmingly are not white, not Jewish, in some sense, not necessarily directly connected to you, is because for 20 centuries, Jews have kept Shabbat. 6 days of the week, 6 days of the week we work, and the seventh day we rest. And I said to him, I think you have to say that rest, and this point I think has been made by several people, but I think it's really true and it's important. Shabbat in Jewish tradition isn't simply about resting. It's about imagining the world as it should be, without us changing, breaking, damaging, destroying, consuming, so that we come out renewed to work those other 6 days for a better world for everybody. And he liked what I said, and I spoke to him on Monday, and I said, what happened? And he said, you know, I said that to the students, and actually they liked it, and we did celebrate Shabbat together, and we learned. And he said, I thought it was a good thing to do. And I wanted to share that story because I think it is a nice story, and in a funny way, it's not totally how I'm feeling at the moment. And I think it's right for us to lift each other up and to try and find ways to nourish ourselves when it actually feels hard. It leads me to the main point that I really want to make, which is that in Jewish tradition, Shabbat is fractal. Firstly, Shabbat itself in Jewish tradition is two things. It is both a memory of creation and it's a memory of the Exodus from Egypt. And that alone is incredibly significant at this moment in human history. The notion that a day of rest is both about the creation and is actually somehow about leaving slavery, and that those two things are intertwined, that's really significant. The next 7 in Jewish tradition is the 7 weeks from Pesach to Shavuot, from Passover to Pentecost. And that's itself about the journey of freedom and the nature of freedom. Passover is a Maslowian basic freedom. It's freedom from oppression, from slavery. It's freedom from racism. It's freedom from all sorts of things in the world today. But in Jewish tradition, that's not an end, it's a beginning. And after Passover, it's like, well, what do we do with this freedom? And we have a 7-week journey in which we meditate on the nature of freedom. And at the end of it, on the 50th day, we have Shavuot and we receive the Torah, which is a different kind of freedom. It's a positive freedom. It's freedom not from, but to. Freedom to self-limit ourselves. Freedom to say, not everything that I can do should I do. And that's wired into Shabbat. And then the third 7 is Shemitah, the sabbatical year. Shabbat ha'aretz, Shabbat for the land. And in Jewish tradition, Shemitah isn't just about letting the land rest. It's about Shmitat Kasafim, which is annulling debts. It's about inequality. It's about the question of who owns the land, who has what, who has access to it. And then finally, the final 7 is the Jubilee, right? After 7 Shemitahs, then you have the Jubilee year. I can remember in England in the 1990s, both Christian leaders and Jewish leaders leading up to the millennium arguing for debt relief in the third world because of the tradition of Shemitah and Yovel, the Jubilee. And so I don't know what we do with it. I don't know how we take it out. But it is really clear within Jewish tradition that the word Shabbat is fractal. It's a hyperlink that connects to each one of these ideas, and every single one of them is needed in the world today. The last thing that I just want to say in a totally different vein is that for much of my life, I've been a pretty traditionally observant Jew. And gradually in the last few years, I've become somewhat less observant. I think it's possible that working in the Jewish community has done this for me. And whereas in a previous life, Shabbat was a break from my week, it was also different from my week. Now, sometimes I'm a little bit Jewed out. I feel sad to say that, but it's true. But nevertheless, I didn't use my phone on Shabbat. And the first 3 weeks of the COVID thing were particularly brutal. And on the fourth Shabbat, I was like, to hell with this. And I got up on Shabbat morning, and for the first time in a very long while, I went out to Central Park. And I walked around Central Park twice, actually walked 14 miles. And I just phoned old friends, phoned friends in England, phoned friends in Israel. And it was a really weird thing, because traditionally I didn't use my phone on Shabbat. I was happy about that. And yet actually this felt like a new way for me to observe Shabbat. And it's mostly been my tradition ever since, whereas I hadn't done that previously, to actually phone old friends. And I think it's a reminder to me, again, it goes back to what Fletcher was saying, that this place of wanting us all both somehow or other to hold ourselves to high standards, and our countries and our organizations to high standards, and yet at the same time also somehow or other to be generous at a time that is very, very, very difficult. And to remember that as well as everything else, we need a positive vision, we need practical next steps, and we need kindness. And I think at its best, Shabbat is a reminder to all of us of all of those things. Thank you.
Nigel, thank you so much. Amen, amen. I'll just note that even when you were walking around Central Park, quote unquote, breaking Shabbat, you did 2 times 7, 14 miles. So some unconscious, deep unconscious thing going on there, obviously. Okay, thank you, Nigel, really. Mark Silk, our last speaker, and then we'll turn to open conversation. Mark is director of the Leonard E. Greenberg Center for the Study of Religion in Public Life and professor of religion in public life at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. He is the author of Spiritual Politics, Religion and America Since World War II, Unsecular Media, Making News of Religion in America, and with Andrew Walsh, One Nation, Divisible, How Regional Religious Differences Shape American Politics. He writes a weekly column for the Religious News Service as well. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. And I feel sort of lucky, privileged to be here. I'm a relative newcomer really to the climate movement. Thanks in large part, I think, to my son Ezra, who helped found an organization called the Climate Mobilization. So it's a wonderful opportunity to follow one's son's footsteps. One of the things that I have done is help put together a coalition of religious leaders and scientists in Massachusetts, now called the Faith Science Coalition, led by Cardinal O'Malley in Boston and Phil Duffy of the Woods Hole Research Center. And so I do think to sort of follow along with some of the questions you raised, it is possible to put together coalitions of religious and in some sense non-religious, or at least not that there aren't scientists who are religious, but coalitions that cross these kinds of lines and traditional ones. I do think nobody's noted this, and maybe it's not even worth mentioning, but I think in the United States anyway, the idea of any kind of mandatory universal Sabbath, I think is off the table. It raises all kinds of Establishment Clause problems. And it also, I think, leads to questions about which day, why that day, who's got hegemonic control over what day, all that kind of thing, that any effort like this, I think, not only should want to avoid, but needs to avoid. I also think that the notion of, or the effort to try to define what rest is for any given tradition is a tricky one. You know, do you get in your electric vehicle and drive to synagogue? Well, no, if you're Orthodox Jewish person, but are we really saying stay home, don't go to shul if it takes a drive? So I think those are interesting and tricky questions. Also, if you're a gardener by profession, you don't want to garden on the Sabbath. If you're, you know, a writer by profession, maybe gardening is something that's part of a day of rest. So I think these are complicated questions, and I don't want to take up more time really, except to say that there's a very interesting old article by a kind of sociologist or anthropologist named Lloyd Warner, talking about how Memorial Day used to work in a New England city. And people would start in their respective religious houses of worship, whether Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, you know, we can name them, and have a service on Memorial Day. And then they would march out of those buildings and all congregate together and celebrate Memorial Day, the kind of civil religious holiday for the country. And it seems to me that one way to think about a universal day of rest, or a day of rest which really includes people coming out of many religious traditions and none at all, is to think of people coming out of their own tradition where they celebrate it, and then joining together with some common ceremonies which may not use the term Sabbath, but which does use some kind of term like a day of rest for the earth, and allow people to take notice, to behave as they see fit in a sort of pluralistic way in a common exercise. Of course, there is the question of which day it would be, but we do have days in which people can come together for various purposes. And I think, you know, it's always an important thing when the last presenter to not spend a lot of time between the presentations and the opportunity for people to ask questions. So I'll cease there.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Thank you for helping us finish up again, very thoughtfully and very much to the point. I really didn't convene everyone here for me to talk a lot. Mirele, do you want to respond to anything anyone said? Any of the panelists have any points that someone else raised that he or she would like to add to or comment on? This is where the Zoom format becomes difficult and challenging, trying to be interactive. Mirele, I take it that you're not interested in saying anything. So anyone else want to pick up any of the points that have been made so far?
So whoever wants to pick up one of the points can also can send a chat to the host, and then I can unmute them.
Great, thank you, Shana. So let me just remind everyone who's still with us, not the panelists, that is, that we will start to take questions soon. Oh, Mirele, we stopped her video. Is that possible, Shana? That's what Mirele seems to say.
Let me look into that.
I think Zoom
Okay.
has made.
I'm back.
Okay, Mirele, you there?
Yes.
Good.
I'll just say a word that I guess two things I wanted to pick up on. I wanted to pick up on Father John's point. I think he talked earlier about so many wise things were said today. Yes, that we need a revolution. And I think that was a theme that came out throughout today. And I must give credit to my own rabbi, Rabbi Sid Schwartz, who I heard speak recently and talked, I think it was a slip of the tongue actually, but he talked about the relationship between revolution and revelation. And I think that perhaps the Green Sabbath can help us to bring the revelation that can lead to the revolution. So I wanted to pick up on that. And then Bill McKibben and I are usually on the same wavelength. And I wanted to pick up on what he said about what is the purpose of spreading the idea of a Green Sabbath, and that it needs to be to build community, because community is what can help us to bring that revolution that we need to have by movement building. It can become the Green Sabbath can become that one of those shared technologies that helps us to build the movement. And perhaps my small contribution could be, how do we do that? We have to how do we build community? And I think all of our, well, you never say all, but many of our faiths can really help us with those tools for building community. And I think within the community is where the Green Sabbath could take hold. And perhaps later on, if it helps with the, if we go that way in the conversation, I can talk a little bit about perspective from psychology about how by changing social norms within the community is how we can encourage people to bring that into their practice and perhaps set this positive chain of change toward the revolution in motion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mirele, thank you for not staying silent. So yeah, I mean, there's just so much that has been said that's really thought-provoking and worth chewing on. I very, very much agree with those who have voiced the opinion, as Reverend Fletcher said, Reverend John said, that really what's needed is a kind of revolution. And I see an eco-Sabbath or Green Sabbath as a radical tool, a tool for radical change. And in some sense, I see it in a perhaps perversely ecumenical sense as something that is challenging both to religious communities and individuals and differently to secular individuals and communities. To religious individuals and communities, I would say, here is an urgent need, an opportunity to revise, to rethink, to rework your tradition of Sabbath and make it even more relevant to the crises we face today. After all, that's why God gave us all these practices, ideas, commandments, whatever one wants to call them, to address ourselves and things in the world. So what could be more desirable from a religious perspective than making Sabbath as relevant as possible? And the environment, again, strikes me as perhaps the manifestation of all of the urgencies wrapped up together. At the same time, to so-called secular communities, I think many of us have voiced this idea that one of the challenges we face as modern 20th, 21st century people living in an individualist, Western society is how difficult it is for us to slow down, to stop, to put brakes on freedoms, desires, conveniences. So here too, I see something like Sabbath, which is, of course, very traditional and unfamiliar to many people, and for many people reeks of religion and reeks of being told what to do. And yet I think that it's one of the many lessons that we have to learn. Okay, that said, I agree. I think that really a lot of what has been said about thinking carefully about what Sabbath means, what it means to keep it, to observe it, to commemorate it, whatever words we want to use in a traditional or non-traditional fashion, in an individual fashion, in a cross-community fashion, a cross-tradition fashion, is a challenge. Will be fun, will be, I think, meaningful, powerful, wonderful, but a challenge. Reverend Fletcher used the term extremist or fundamentalist. It's a term some people will have bristled at, I see in some of the comments. How does one define extremist? How does one define fundamentalist? But what will be an interesting challenge is how, as always, how does one balance, especially in a religious tradition, in a religious community, how does one balance particularity and universalism? How does one balance loving your tradition, believing in it, finding it meaningful, believing it is the word of God, but also being open-minded, understanding that there are many interpretations of the word of God, understanding there are many approaches to even the tradition of the Sabbath, and it is not clear to whom it belongs. One of the challenges I foresee is exactly that problem. I'm not sure if this meeting just got cut off. If we're all still there, we're still there? Great. Something very strange happened to my screen. Anyway, so those are some of the challenges that occurred to me. Does anyone else any of the panelists want to jump in, want to say anything? Everyone's very shy suddenly. All these world-class authors and speakers and preachers. Yes, someone is sharing their screen. I'm not sure why Tammy Bivens is sharing her screen with us. That seems to be the problem. Tamar, thank you. Okay, see, we can communicate. Ellen, take your mic off, unmute.
Oh, there I go. Okay.
Good.
So I can't remember exactly what you said, but my response is that there's all kinds. To me, there's lots of different ways of observing Shabbat or observing the Sabbath, and I don't see this at all as like legislating one particular way. So to me, that's the beauty of this whole idea, is that communities get to come up with different ways of doing it. And there's all these different possibilities. So anyway.
Absolutely, yes. You read my mind. I mean, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Anyone else? Any other panelists want to weigh in? Okay, John Chryssavgis is saying goodbye. Thank you, Archdeacon John. Really an honor and a pleasure to have you here. Okay, so if none of the panelists want to continue to pontificate, pun intended, that was just a joke, that's fine. So let's just open it up to the general audience. We have many people who've got raised hands and have submitted questions already. There have been about 250 people here for the event, so we cannot possibly get to all of the questions. But we will try. I believe the method is that Shana has been seeing the different chat messages, and Shana is going to pick out some of the questions she finds most interesting. Shana, are you with us? You ready?
Yes. So I see that some people have their hands up, and anybody who has a question should put it into the chat. I've enabled people to message me. So not everybody will see the messages, and then I'll go through and give messages to the panelists. And if anybody has a question for a specific panelist, then that works great too.
Okay, so Shana, you want to pick a first question?
I'm just going to start looking through these.
Okay,
So
great.
somebody has a question for Fletcher Harper. Who is defined as a fundamentalist or extremist?
A softball question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
In many places, there are large percentages of the religious population that describe themselves as fundamentalists. And I mean, in the US, a significant percentage of the conservative Christian movement self-describes as fundamentalist. In India, you have Hindu nationalists who self-identify in that kind of way. In Brazil, you have large portions of the Christian population that self-identify as Pentecostal fundamentalists. So, I mean, there's a self-described dimension to it. I mean, from a climate perspective, what we see is a pattern of religious groups, very often culturally and politically conservative, and very often with ties to extractive industries, who actively oppose various forms of environmental and human rights and gender and racial protections and sexual identity, gender identity protections. So I mean, that broad rubric, actually, if one looks at it, helps identify groups that we would characterize in that kind of way. I think the challenge around this topic in religious communities is that religious communities often tiptoe around, or moderate to progressive religious communities often tiptoe around this question because it's either seen as unseemly, or there's a somewhat vain hope of engaging deeply conservative religious groups around these topics, which just hasn't proven fruitful over the last 25 years. So I think, you know, from our perspective, it's very important to talk about this and to challenge the very notion of religion as an important force when there is such an incredibly wide diversity of ways in which religion manifests globally.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think these are, you know, real and complicated issues.
I mean, one specific example, taking Nigel's sort of good practice of a story, one of the largest floats 2 years ago in the carnival parades in Brazil was a fundamentalist Christian float that was reenacting over and over and over again a panorama of missionaries converting indigenous peoples from the Amazon to Christianity. So, you know, broad daylight, it was not hidden. So, I mean, I think these are, you know, this is, and that's a far more powerful religious force in a number of geographies than the religious communities with which I would guess many of us are affiliated and associated.
Yeah, look, again, I think it's hard as someone who sees myself as religious in one definition or another. I see it all the time. It's very difficult to both be within that community, within your faith community, and also to be able to be critical at the same time, to be able to see things for what they are, or to learn from other disciplines, to learn from other traditions. Openness and again, a kind of desire for the sacredness, the truth of what one has been given or told is a challenge. It's a challenge. I wonder if any of you would be interested in taking up that question, which I think is related and very apt. You know, if you see the chats, if you see the comments, you know, again, there are many communities, many individuals who claim to have a monopoly on what the Sabbath is, which day of the week it should fall on, what it means to observe the Sabbath or not observe it, etc. Is that something we need to worry about? Are we going to constantly, is it a project like this going to constantly be harangued by people claiming, you know, that we're usurping, stealing, perverting, you know, something biblical, something God-given, etc.? Anyone daring enough to take that on?
If any of the panelists would like to take that on, then message me, please.
And if not, then Shana, you want to pick a second question?
Sure. Someone has asked a question for Jonathan. How could a universal day of rest be feasible across nations with varying cultures and ways of life?
Excellent question. I myself am ambivalent about the term universal day of rest, because I think it implies things that I'm not sure I favor. Of course, this project is not about me by any means. I think a day of universal rest sounds better to me. Again, I see this as a voluntary thing. I see our mission as one of education and advocacy. My dream, my fantasy is to have 1 billion, 2 billion Jews, Christians, and Muslims keeping some form of a day of rest on the day that they choose to do it. So I don't see a need to have all monotheists keeping a single day. I don't see the need to have the whole world keep a single day. This, to me, seems best as a voluntary project that individuals and communities take on themselves. I've lived in Germany, I've lived in Israel, where both countries that have official days of rest. In Germany, the day of rest is on the Christian Sabbath, Sunday. As a Jew, that's highly inconvenient for me, but I actually have no problem with it. I find it a beautiful way to enforce a kind of day of rest. The German model is not total, right? So sporting events happen, restaurants are open, emergency essential businesses are open. That's one model. In Israel, the model is a little bit more total. In many Israeli cities, absolutely everything is shut down. Public transportation, no stores are allowed to open. There too, it is obviously highly inconvenient for many people, and especially for communities that are not Jewish, for instance, since in Israel, the day of rest is Saturday, right? Friday night to Saturday night. So I personally sympathize with an official day of rest. I don't have an issue with it, but I can see that it would be incredibly divisive, constitutionally unacceptable in the United States. So I have no interest in pushing for a law mandating a single day of rest for everyone. But on the other hand, let's say, 50% of Christians kept Sunday as a real day of rest, in whatever fashion, really abstaining from impacting the environment in the United States. Let's say, 70%, 50% of Jews and Seventh-day Adventists keep Saturday as a day of rest. 50% of Muslims keep Friday as a day of rest. I don't know. Would the consequences be so terrible? I don't know. Society, I think, would figure out how to cope. Some store owners and business owners would close their businesses down, their stores down voluntarily because they care to, out of sympathy, for environmental reasons, whatever. I don't know. I'm not really sure I see such a cataclysmic, disastrous situation coming out of it. On the other hand, I'm not worried about it yet. This is all incredibly hypothetical. So I'm a little bit just speculating, and really that's my personal answer. I hope I covered the question. Any other panelists want to weigh in on that one?
I'm going to unmute Mirele, who is asking some good questions. That's okay.
Very okay.
Okay, well, first of all, I think that the idea is to set a goal, not to tell everyone how to do it. I was thinking of the example, let's say, of the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. These are goals that a lot of people in different cultures, different societies, different perspectives have agreed upon. And it's actually worked to move the world, toward more equity, toward, compassion, solidarity, and, putting these values out there, but actually putting goals. And I think Bill McKibben gave us a very good warning, which is, he said, just, even with the pandemic, the emissions level hasn't gone down that much. So we really need to set some specific goals, and maybe that's something where, religions could come together and set their own goals, but actually with a technology that you're suggesting for how we could actually start to get closer to meeting them. But the other thing is, I'd like to hear Fletcher talk about this, because Fletcher runs an interfaith organization that has global reach, where faith leaders have come together and set goals together. And how do we build that kind of coalition where people are working together and don't feel that any one group is dominating? I think Fletcher could tell us a little bit about that.
I appreciate the kind words, Mirele, but I'm a little bit conscious about taking up too much space here. So I think my very brief thought would be to celebrate the diverse ways in which different cultures live this out, and share diverse stories of how that happens. And I think also, to me, this is, I think, to be honest, within the Jewish and the Seventh-day Adventist community and portions of the Christian community, there's been a lot more good thinking about this. But I'd be interested in seeing a sort of a theory of change or a mission statement for what the vision behind this might be, so that it got spelled out in diverse ways by people from diverse traditions and in diverse geographies and cultures. So I would drop the word universal quickly, just because I think that sort of is a Western universalizing thing. But
I'll have a word if that's okay. Am I heard?
Yeah, please.
Okay. It seems to me that there's a question for the project, whether this is the degree to which this is a religious exercise or an environmental exercise. And it can be different for different people. But to the extent that it is meant to include people who are not particularly religious, and to include people from different faith traditions, what we're really talking about is some degree of secularization of the enterprise. That is to say, inclusive in a way that does not depend on a particular set of beliefs about the institution of a day of rest, whether it's in Judaism or the Lord's Day in Christianity, which is not, in some parts of the Christian world, Sunday is the Lord's Day. It's not the Sabbath. And so I think if people are comfortable that it is not bad to talk about this as a secularized, in effect, civil enterprise, which comes out of religious traditions, and we have experience of that kind of thing.
Mark, a couple of people have asked what type of attractive expectation should be placed on people.
What kind of a what?
I think you would use the word attractive expectations for Sabbath observance.
Well, I'm not sure I really understand the question. I mean, maybe I think there are different. I mean, I associate myself with the view that different people within a given tradition have different senses of what it means to observe a day of rest, and different people who have different kinds of occupations have different notions of what it means to take a rest from work. if I, if I do certain kinds of work, it can be restful to do something else. And, and there are also some pretty sharp lines. I mean, do you put an eruv around your community so that you can carry something? I mean, so that there's a whole range of these things. And I think anything that aspires not necessarily to be universal, but comprehensive in some way, has to take account of the diversity of views if we're not going to be in a society which beats people over the head according to some set of norms that are established by the people who are in authority.
So to clarify the question a little bit, by attractive, meaning what is the reason that you could use to convince companies, individual people, and governments to go along with this idea? Like how could this be?
Well, I see what's, yeah. I mean, I think there is a powerful acceptance in most societies, as I read it, that people shouldn't work 7 days a week. Most places, including China, including India, many coming out of many different traditions, some with religious traditions that have days of rest, others not so much, but understanding that rest is good. My own sense here that can work for people and what makes it attractive is the idea that the earth needs a rest, that this is somehow, part of an understanding in a way that we leave fields fallow. It gets to what Nigel is saying about the richness of a tradition that understands rest in a whole range of ways, including forgiving of debts and of having Jubilee years and of somehow taking a break. I think there is something very broad, if not universal, in that. And I think it's very attractive to people. I mean, most people would prefer not to work 7 days a week. And I think they understand that in some ways, whether it's highly secularized academics happy to take their sabbaticals, or other people, that, that it's a good thing, and that at a time when we're thinking deeply about climate change, about global warming, about too much carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, that the idea that we help the earth take something of a break, while not a sufficient solution to the problem, we understand that there are profound, industrial decisions, governmental decisions that have to be made. But as a heuristic and as a literal contribution in some small way to the greater good here, I think we can make the case.
Okay, Nigel, I'm going to have you respond to a question if you're there.
So I am. I don't know if you can hear me. You stopped my video.
Yes.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I really wanted Jonathan and Shana, I really want to thank everybody for this, because I suddenly, right at the end, having started off feeling very miserable, feel buzzed in a certain way and suddenly clearer about things. And I wanted to just say a couple of things very quickly. One is something that Ellen said very early on that didn't get picked up on, which is something about the role of the arts. And I just wanted to call that out again, having not mentioned it for the previous 80 minutes, because I actually think it's really important. Second thing that I want to say is that I really had a moment of clarity just now, and it's this following thing, that the climate crisis is the defining crisis of this era, and we have to take it on. Every person, every organization, every faith community. And that's one jigsaw piece. That's simply a piece in being a human being alive today. And it's why also, Jonathan, I was thrilled that Benji was here. And Benji, we never met before, but I think the world needs conservative Republicans. I mean, if we're going to have conservative Republicans, we should have conservative Republicans who are going to fight for climate change, for responding to climate change. So I think that's a key good. But I actually think that needs to be disentangled from Shabbat. I think it's actually wrong to instrumentalize Shabbat, and that includes instrumentalizing Shabbat in order to take on the climate. to the extent that it connects, I think it's not just that Shabbat is about making a better world, it's also that we need human wellness. And that leads me to the very last thing that I want to pull out that's been indirectly referred to in stuff about church and state, but it hasn't been said. And it's about Shabbat as a version of the commons. So a long time ago, when I was, I think, a teenager, there was a columnist in Britain for The Observer, The Guardian, the equivalent of the New York Times, called Chaim Beaumont, who was Scottish and Jewish and Orthodox. And when I was a kid, everything was closed in England on Sundays because it was the Sabbath. Stores weren't open, things were really closed. And in the early days of Margaret Thatcher, they were basically loosening up those laws so that effectively the big box retailers, the supermarkets and stuff, could open on Sundays. And Chaim Beaumont wrote an op-ed in The Observer, which I remember to this day, in which he said, I'm an Orthodox Jew, and the stores are open on Saturday and I can't shop in them. So on the face of it, I ought to be wildly in favor of this new law to open things up on Sunday. He said, but in fact, it's precisely because I'm an observant Jew that I'm against it. And although my Shabbat is on a Saturday and not a Sunday, in living in a country where there is a feeling of difference between one day of the week, in this case Sunday, and the rest of the week, and there is a cessation of commerce, at least a slowing down, and certain things, certain values rise, he said, that's why I'm against breaching these laws and in favor of actually maintaining the laws against Sunday trading. And it goes to this issue of the public good and the private, and the extent to which we need not only Shabbat for each one of us as individuals, and Shabbat as a trigger to imagine a better world and changing the world, but we actually need to stop the 24/7-ness of the world. And the ability to find a way to language that as a public good, even if it happens not to be on the day that we ourselves observe as the Sabbath. And that might mean that things are closed in Israel on a Saturday and across the Muslim world on a Friday and across the historically Christian world on a Sunday. I think that I agree with Chaim Beaumont on that. And I think that what has been so good about this, Jonathan, it's the last thing that I want to say, is that unpacking these questions is in and of itself a great thing to do. Jewish tradition clearly believes that it is in learning that we change our patterns of behavior. And so I feel provoked from this to continue to think about it more deeply. And I think that your project is a project to raise these conversations in public space and across all of our faith communities, and certainly I personally and Chazon as an organization will do all that we can to move this forwards.
Shantha, a question for you if you're available. Hi.
Still can't oh, great. I unmuted. Hello.
So the question was, how do we address inequities in the US or elsewhere that force some people to work multiple jobs or 7 days a week?
Yeah, that's a huge question that could be a whole webinar by itself, but I will get there. I wanted to comment on what we were discussing earlier about how to share this priority of a day of rest. So Creation Justice Ministries, the organization that I serve, brings together a couple dozen religious denominations that all have different ways of expressing their commitments to themselves and each other, whether that be through encyclicals or letters, or they pass resolutions at an assembly. And I think it would be very exciting if there were some ecumenical and interfaith processes for theological reflection on the modern need for Sabbath. And then maybe flowing out of that, we would see a group of these types of documents and resolutions passing that would allow each community to adapt for their own understanding what this could mean for them, and also for them to make some religious promises about what they will do together. So back to the question about the inequities. So I think it's very important at the very minimum that workers have more religious freedom protections. There are quite a few people who work in jobs where you have to accept the hours that you are assigned, or you're out, you lose your job and you'll just find someone else. And the time that you carve out for your day of rest needs to be respected. But on a much larger scale, obviously we need a living wage. The pandemic has made abundantly clear that we need to separate the provision of healthcare, which should be for everyone, from your employment situation. And those would be two very basic necessary steps in the right direction towards making a universal or some sort of a day of rest possible for everyone.
Sorry, I was muted. I am welcoming more questions from audience members and comments from panelists. Jonathan, about how many more questions do you think we have time for right now?
Well, we're getting close to the 2-hour mark. I don't want to burden anyone. Let's, see if we can fit in 3 more questions or comments. That would be great.
Okay.
Are you waiting for me?
So I'm going to have Mirele has a comment.
I wanted to go back to something that you brought up, Jonathan, right at the beginning, which is the Sabbath as a vision of what our world can be like. I think several other people touched on that as well. We know from the research what there is, there's not as much there should be, but the research that there is about how people think about climate change, that climate change is a very overwhelming and frightening topic, and that people respond much better to positive vision of the future. And that when we're able to share that positive vision with them, people do get involved. People are willing to take action and do their part in bringing about the world that we want to see. So I think that that's a very important lesson for this project, that maybe it's not so much about which day we celebrate, the Sabbath on, but about that platform and how to communicate, how to help people communicate the value of this and the positive vision of what a world would be like, where the Sabbath, the values that underpin the Sabbath, maybe it's not so much about what day it's celebrated on, but about what kind of world we're trying to build. And I think that the other, piece of that, the value of it here is that the Sabbath is something that many people, not all people, it doesn't have to be everyone. Researchers, sociologists are telling us now that if 3.5% of the people get involved in a movement for change, it will succeed. So we don't have to speak to everyone, but maybe it's about speaking to those for whom the idea of the Sabbath already resonates. And I know Nigel said we don't want to instrumentalize it. I love you, Nigel, but we're always changing what our rituals mean. And I think one thing that we've learned from this pandemic, I don't know, my community has completely changed the way we celebrate the Sabbath already, So maybe people are primed for that transition now. And this is something that can help to take it to the next level. Not about just a reaction to what we couldn't do during the pandemic, but about what we want to do after this pandemic. And by the way, the pandemic's not going to be over, they're telling us probably a couple years. So this may be just the moment to share these ideas. So thank you. I add my thanks to those of everyone else. Thank you for opening up this really important discussion.
So one more important question. So there's been a few comments like you can't build a free world based on religious coercion, some questions about separation between church and state. If the majority deems Sabbath as Sunday, then what if the progression of this movement is then infringing on the individuals or a group of people's rights And I think this is also a question about Christian hegemony in this country, and the fact that secularism is still a form of Christianity, and to remember that different religions in this country that are not Christianity are minority groups. So how do we address this? And this is a question for all of the panelists, if anyone would like to weigh in. All right, all right, so Fletcher says he has to leave right at 6, that's fine. Jonathan, would you like to speak to this?
Sure. I've never been one to shy away from hard questions. Look, it's an excellent question. It's a very difficult question. This is always an issue with multicultural societies. So I guess I would think about it on 2 levels. One is the historical specificity of Christian hegemony in the West and in the United States. And the second level would be, or second way to look at it is just from a structural perspective of whenever there's a majority or a dominating group, what happens to minorities, groups under that. And I would maybe give 2 different answers to, to each of those perspectives. Yes, it's always a question of having to balance the rights of the minority and not allow tyranny of the majority, as de Tocqueville warned us against in the 1830s. At the same time, unless you have every society being a monocultural society, monolithic society, which is simply not possible, and I would say not desirable at all, there's no way around it. In other words, it's inevitable that in normal people are going to be left out in some forms or other. Now, I'm not talking about real discrimination and exclusion, which should always be opposed. And I'm not talking about an economic burden because one is not a member of the dominant group. But for instance, in Germany, if there's a Sunday Sabbath law and I'm Jewish and I can't shop on Saturdays because my religion tells me I can't, and then Sundays everything's closed, it actually is quite an inconvenience. It makes my weekends not particularly useful for doing the things that I need to do when I'm not working the other 6 days a week. So I'm suffering. I'm suffering from the dominant majority's imposition of its way on me. To go back to what Nigel was saying, I think we have to ask ourselves, I need to ask myself, how terrible is that suffering? Is that suffering a case that I can live with? Is it something that is absolutely unjust? So what Shantha was talking about, right? If you're a Seventh-day Adventist and your workplace doesn't care that you want to take Saturday off, then you're really burdened by that. And that is a very real burden. So I certainly don't have a magical answer for how we would go about doing this. Again, my vision is not to have a legally mandated day of rest at all. But even if it's not legally mandated, even if it's voluntary, and let's say you live in a small town, and the small town, all the population of the town decides they like the idea of a day of rest on Sunday for environmental reasons, and businesses go along with it, and the town kind of shuts down. So yeah, you might be inconvenienced. Many people might be inconvenienced by that. I don't know. I don't have a magical solution to how we address this. The one perspective I will offer, which has been offered by some of the other panelists, such as Nigel, is it seems that there are competing values, competing imperatives. That's always the case in any society, in any religion, in any community. On the one hand, you want to address poverty. On the other hand, you want to have not an economic burden of forcing people to work. there are many other examples. So here I think we have competing values, and we can't necessarily address them all perfectly. One value, I think many of us agree, is how do we design our society so that we're not driving ourselves crazy, that we're not working ourselves to death, that we're not working the environment to death, that we're not burdening the ecosystems, that we're not causing economic and psychological violence to all sorts of people who are scrambling just to find work, and most of the work, excuse my Latin, is shitty work to begin with, right? So one of the values, the benefits of something like Sabbath, a holistic approach, is ideally, at its best, really could serve as a means to address many of these oversights, many of these problems. Sabbath could be a wonderful opportunity once a week to meditate on what kind of working environments do we want? What does it mean to work? What kind of work environments should corporations be offering? What are the burdens of the kinds of work that are being offered to poor people, the lower classes? What is the hypocrisy of calling people essential workers, but giving them no protections and forcing them to be heroes, at their own expense for our sakes? So again, for me, Sabbath is not just about what we don't do on Sabbath, what we prevent people from doing, imposing abstention, imposing, thou shalt nots. Sabbath must be, as many of you have said, about eating together, having fun together, coming together to commune, about remembering and emphasizing the importance of family, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that wasn't a direct answer, but hopefully it approached it.
I'm just going to have Mirele comment, and then I think we should wrap up. And then, okay.
I was thinking, thank you very much for calling on me. I was thinking as I listened to your response to this question about something very profound that another teacher of mine, Dr. Jeremy Bernstein, said about the sabbatical year. And what he said is when people get wrapped up in the details of how the sabbatical year would be implemented, and we know that it's a vision of an ideal society, and probably could not be implemented the way it is laid out in the Bible or even in our other later texts. He said, it's not about the answers, it's about the question. And that's what the Green Sabbath Project has to be about also. It's not about the answer of what day the Sabbath will be observed on. It's about what questions does the Sabbath force us to ask about our society. And I just want to leave it on a very important point, because I know that there are people on this call from all over the world. And I think it's amazing, Jonathan, that you were able to bring together such a diverse group of people. And I hope in the next meeting, we'll be able to hear all of those people's voices and have a really open discussion with all of those voices being a part of it. I think that's part of how we're going to answer all of these questions. So I just want to be sure that everyone on this call hears that the answer has to be no. The Sabbath, the Green Sabbath, can't be about any specific group imposing their idea of the Sabbath on everyone else. It has to be about what are the solutions, the goals, the principles, the values that we want our world to be about in the future, because those are the goals that are going to lead us to be able to solve the climate crisis and bring about a better world for all of us. So the answer has to be no, it's not about imposing anything on anyone.
Okay.
Thank you. Excellent. Mirele, you are the best closing act we could have asked for. Thank you. Excellent. Very, very well put. Listen, everyone, thank you. Really, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I am the one who is honored to have you all here. And I mean that not just for our distinguished panelists, but really for all of you who sat and listened and who asked all kinds of questions that I know we could not get to. So let me just wrap up very quickly and say, I hope indeed we will have a follow-up meeting. I am planning to do similar conversations for a European audience and in Israel, which will be even much more fun and contentious than this one, believe me. And hopefully in the United States to have follow-up conversations. Please, if you're interested in being involved, if you have suggestions, panelists, if you have notes from what you said, please send them to me. Please let us know that you're interested in being involved. I'm very, very eager to get feedback, suggestions, ideas, and that goes for all of the participants too who were listening in. I know that you had many questions that we couldn't get to. Feel free to write them to me. If you look at our website, you can get in touch with us. I cannot promise, but I will try to address any reasonable questions and in a reasonable fashion. Please, if you like this idea, help us spread the word, organize local events, stay in touch. Really, again, thank you, thank you. I look forward to continuing the conversation with as many of you as possible. And I have to really end by saying I have learned as much as anyone else from this. It's been super helpful for me to have your ideas, to help crystallize different things that we need to think about, that I need to think about. So I'm really, really grateful to you.